As we know, the SCP Foundation is home to some of the most horrifying, unspeakable beings, if that's even what you'd call some of them. Now, given the fact that there are literally thousands of them, it was pretty hard to narrow it down to 10 that would cause the most destruction. And you guys may disagree with this list, so I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments below. Either way, today on Life's Biggest Questions, we're counting down the top 10 scary SCP creatures you wouldn't want to escape. At 10, we got SCP-17. Although it appears to only be 2.6 feet tall, SCP-17 is simply a shadow-looking figure that can literally absorb anything. What makes 17 so dangerous is that anything that casts a shadow upon it will simply be consumed. After one casts their shadow upon 17, the SCP's immediate reaction is to leap at and consume, or fully cover, whatever initially casted the shadow. However, 17 then returns to its normal size, and there doesn't appear to be any trace of what it consumed. The most obvious question is, where do the people go? How does this thing consume things without leaving a trace? It's almost as if a ghostly figure were to attack someone and then have them disappear. The only real way to fight against this would be to show the SCP its own reflection, and make sure it's constantly in a well-lit area. If 17 were to escape, I'm not so sure the Foundation would ever find a way to contain it again. Aside from the fact that it can be so dangerous, the fact that as a shadow it can literally hide anywhere, damage aside, this SCP may never be caught again. That in itself makes 17 not only one of the most dangerous, but definitely not one you want escaping. Moving on to number 9, SCP-1471. Now this SCP is actually a free 9.8 megabyte application for mobile devices. The app itself is titled Mal-O Verve 1.0.0, and it somehow finds a way to skip the approval process to get into app stores, nor does it even have a developer. Other managers can't seem to remove the app either, and upon downloading, unlike other apps, you won't find any shortcuts or icons on your phone. Instead, you'll start periodically receiving text message images with SCP-1471-A somewhere in the photo. 1471-A is described as, I quote, a large humanoid figure with a candid-like skull and black hair. It appears as time goes on after the initial download of the application, you start to receive different types of pictures, always containing the being. During the first 24 hours, the images sent to you will be taken at locations you frequently visit. After 48 hours, the images will then change to locations you recently visited. After 72 hours, you'll start receiving images of yourself in real time, with SCP-1471-A appearing to be within close proximity. Anyone with over 90 hours exposure to the text message images will start to see the figure on a regular basis, either in their peripherals or on reflective surfaces. It's also possible they see them in both. At this point, the damage is irreversible, and some have claimed that 1471-A has tried to communicate with them visually, but its actions are incomprehensible. Those who have less than 90 hours exposure to the images are capable of reversing the effects. However, anyone who exceeds the 90-hour mark sustains irreversible damage. Although the being does not appear to be hostile, it would certainly be quite scary to consistently see it and have no way of telling people what's happening. There's also the question as to what its purpose is. Who knows what message it's trying to get across? I just hope this one stays contained for good. At 8, SCP-106. Appearing to be an elder human whose face has decomposed almost as if they were mummified, this SCP appears to contain an alternate dimension. Yeah, it's a weird one. Although it prefers those aged 10 to 25, 106 will simply hunt whoever it can find. Aside from being able to scale walls, it can also cause a corrosion effect, where it appears to break down solid materials. This is usually seen in the form of rusting, cracking, or rotting, as well as the creation of a black, mucus-like substance, similar to what coats 106. By staying dormant for long periods of time, 106 catches its victims by surprise, and likes to toy with its prey. The dimension which this SCP somehow has control of is only available to those who fall victim to 106, as well as the being itself. It appears the dimension is made up mostly of halls and doors, and people have been released from the dimension in the past, only to be hunted again and brought right back. It's unclear what the purpose of this dimension is or how it was created, but it seems once you are targeted and consumed, there is no saving you. So you guys can probably see why we wouldn't want this one to escape. It could stay dormant for days, weeks, and months, possibly even years. Who knows? And it seems there's no real way of strapping it down or killing it, meaning if 106 were to get out of its containment, which it's been known to damage badly in the past, well, we wouldn't have much of a chance, if any at all. Now moving on to number 7, we got SCP-457. Appearing to be a single flame, the size of one you'd see on the end of a lit match, it's unclear what 457 is actually composed of. The being outlines the shape it assumes with flames as it grows, eventually assuming a human-like form if supplied with enough fuel. As 457 grows, it appears to get more intelligent, assuming more complex shapes, and eventually reaching a threshold to the point that it splits into two beings. This trend continues if 457 is given a consistent fuel source. However, the multiple beings of 457 tend to be aggressive toward each other, especially if there is a limited fuel supply. With its main goal appearing to grow in size, attempts at putting 457 out tend to lead it to become more aggressive, trying to assume a larger size and attacking. It also eventually learns ways to communicate, usually with flames or by charring words into the walls. It's safe to say if 457 got out, we'd likely just have a lot of fires all over the world. We may even find ourselves watching what appear to be humans, outlined in fire, trying to attack each other. Then again, this whole year has been quite a ride. Still, I feel this SCP would cause a tremendous amount of damage. Imagine it stumbles upon a gas station. At that point, there'd likely be so many of these figures, we'd never be able to stop them. At 6, we got SCP-55. The Foundation refers to 55 as a self-keeping secret or anti-meme. This is because those who try to study SCP-55 tend to forget everything they know about it within minutes of retaining the information. To no surprise, details about how or when 55 came to the Foundation is unknown, and people don't even know who or how its chamber was made. Speaking on physicality, again, it's a big question mark. And it's not that this SCP is invisible or indescribable. As previously mentioned, those who study it tend to forget all the information they retain within minutes. In fact, observers are able to take mental and written notes, photographs, sketches, and even take audio or video recordings of 55. However, it seems all information regarding 55's physical appearance, I quote directly from the SCP Foundation's website, leaks out of a human mind soon after such an observation. It seems those tasked with describing 55's appearance tend to lose interest in the task at hand and have their minds wander off. Those who try to sketch a photograph immediately forget what the photograph looks like, and the same goes for anyone involved with overseeing tests conducted on 55. Security personnel who observed 55 through closed-circuit cameras end their shifts feeling exhausted with little or no memory of events that took place during their shifts. So if this SCP were to escape, well, not only would we have no idea it even exists, but we'd forget about it briefly after seeing it. But who knows what damage it would do? We literally have no way of even guessing how dangerous this SCP can be, because we don't even know what it's fully capable of, and likely never will. Halfway now at number 5, we got SCP-682. What resembles a very large, almost crocodile-like creature, 682 has a pure hatred for all types of life. A highly intelligent creature with incredible strength, speed, and reflexes, this SCP can also shapeshift. But not your traditional from human to bat, more so just growing in size after ingesting materials it can feed on. 682 has also shown it can communicate, and at one point was still walking and talking with 87% of its body already destroyed. Considering how this thing is pretty much indestructible and it's one of the few SCPs that the Foundation is actually trying to destroy, well, that should speak for itself. They have a hard time containing 682 as is, so if it were to escape, the amount of sheer destruction it would cause, not only to the world, but possibly to other SCP chambers or containment areas, would be incredibly dangerous. This could obviously lead to other SCPs being released, and if one being out is bad enough, imagine a dozen, all with different abilities. Now on to number 4, SCP-1861. It appears 1861 is a spontaneous weather event that can affect any area randomly. Upon its manifestation, a submarine emerges in any body of water it can fit in. This is referred to as SCP-1861-A. SCP-1861-A contains humanoids which appear to be people in scuba diver suits. These people try to convince more people to join them inside the submarine, sometimes in a more aggressive manner than other times. And when they aren't being deployed to recruit more people to join them, they are taken to another world or dimension. That world of dimension is all underwater, and everything is made of water or an apparent liquid of sorts. There's no food or water, they don't sleep, and anyone who takes their suit off, regardless of where they are, in the real world or this other dimension, will immediately dissipate. It seems as if once you are captured by these guys, you become them. It's not clear what happens to your mind or consciousness, but these beings are mostly capable of speech. Still, if these were real and people were either fooled into thinking it was maybe the government trying to protect them, or they were just forcefully taken, well, either way we'd start losing a lot of humans quickly. And with no way of really stopping it, we just have to hope the weather didn't affect our area, or we need to learn how to fend these guys off and constantly be on the move from this weather. Which also kind of technically means this SCP needs to be contained when it starts, which is scary in itself. On to 3, SCP-3199. Standing at 9.5 feet and weighing over 1,700 pounds, this half-chicken, half-chimpanzee looking fella is actually believed to have been a human whose self-experimenting went awry. Its neck is dislocated and is able to turn 340 degrees, and if the physical description of this thing isn't bad enough, it can reach speeds of up to 25 miles per hour and lives to hunt. 3199 is also known to birth eggs out of its mouth, which are covered in an extremely corrosive material when they first come out. These eggs appear to be next to indestructible, as attempts to break them using extreme force with physical objects, high levels of pressure, blades to cut, as well as long-term acid exposure have all proven to fail. The scary thing about this one, aside from its physical appearance and attributes, is the fact that we can't really destroy it. Not that we can't, but we shouldn't, because if we do, well, each one is known to have at least one egg inside of its body. Destroying a grown one could lead to others hatching, which could cause even more problems, and eventually a takeover. It seems the Foundation found a way to destroy the eggs, submerging them in liquid nitrogen and then pressuring it before incinerating the leftover remains. Clearly, if this thing escaped, the human race would simply be over due to the fact that we would have no way of stopping it. Containing really is the only thing to do. Now at number 2, we got SCP-173. Made up of concrete and rebar, this SCP is tall and thin, with a large round head, appearing to be way too big for its body. The thing with 173 is, if someone continuously looks at it, for whatever reason, it can't move. But if you break line of sight, it can move quickly, and you'll regret not keeping your eyes on the prize. When 173 isn't being looked at, it is incredibly hostile, and it is known to either snap its victims' necks or strangle them. So clearly, if this thing somehow escaped, it would kill a ton of people and likely cause immense destruction. That being said, odds are eventually we would find a way to constantly keep it under a watchful eye. This may be a way to stop 173 for a short period of time, but initially, the terror it would cause would almost certainly lead to people running away from it. This would lead to a lot of death, and in a very short period of time. Now, I was debating putting this one at the top spot because it is the highest rated SCP, and I felt that alone speaks volumes. Still, there is one other SCP that is the absolute top dog. This is the one that if it escaped, the world as we know it is over. I mean, you could probably say that about a handful of these SCPs, but this one is the true champion. Coming in at number 1, to no surprise, SCP-001. The thing with SCP-001 is that no one really knows its true identity. The Foundation's website even explains there are false or fake reports regarding 001 mixed in with the real reports, so its true identity is never fully revealed. That in itself is scary enough that we need to make sure the Foundation keeps this thing, whatever it is, contained. A few of the more well-known SCP-001s include the Gate Guardian, When Day Breaks, and the Scarlet King. But there are a total of 31 proposals, some being real and some being fabricated, in regards to what 001 actually is. Because of this, I can't really go into detail about why or what it could possibly do if it escaped, but considering how dangerous it appears to be, to the point that the Foundation doesn't even want us knowing its true identity, makes it clear this SCP is like no other. And a common trait a lot of the reports include tend to make 001 appear to be godlike, or a being with powers similar to that of a god. Again, these could just be a falsified trait that completely throws us off the real 001. One of my favorite comments regarding 001 was on a Reddit post from a user named Wheatley Gone, who explained, I quote, "There is no true SCP-001. Instead, there are proposals, which are, in universe, fake files made to obscure the one of them that is true. So it's up to you to decide which you believe and which are just fake." So on that note, I encourage you guys to check out 001 and let me know in the comments which one you think is the real one. Regardless, any SCP that were to escape would likely be detrimental to the human race, one way or another, with the exception of maybe a few. The human body can be described as a well-oiled machine. There's tons of working parts that go hand in hand to ensure our body can function. The heart pumps blood, the blood carries oxygen, the oxygen is quite literally what gives us life. But the idea of physical gears being a part of your body seems, well, inhumane. If anything, it's mechanical, which would make you the furthest thing from human. And I'm not talking about an Iron Man, Tony Stark type gear, I'm talking metal tubes and cranks, like the real deal. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to SCP-217. If a virus like this were to slowly take over the world, well, one thing is for sure, it'd be working around the clock. Alright, enough of that. Today on Life's Biggest Questions, we're asking, what if SCP-217 was real, the clockwork virus? For now, let's get into exploring what if SCP-217 was real. So it seems SCP-217 is actually a virus. It's incurable and has a 100% rate of infecting those exposed to it. The virus itself can be transmitted through physical touch or contact with bodily fluids, and symptoms may not show up for years. The virus itself turns organic tissue into an organic metal. It's not fully understood how this process takes place, but it's clear what happens to the infected subject. Specifically in humans, those infected may not even be aware in the early stages. Symptoms such as feelings of confusion, insomnia, and joint stiffness are all related to this infection in its early stages, but as the virus strengthens, those infected have reported being in a tremendous amount of pain. According to the SCP Foundation, hearts are replaced by gears and small tubes, joints are replaced by gear networks, and eyes are replaced by what appears to be hand-crank film cameras. Signs of infection appear on the outside of all bodies except for mammals, who go through an internal transformation before showing signs on the surface. According to the SCP Foundation, the virus has infected major metropolitan areas, although where exactly has been deemed classified. Those who are in the middle or advanced stages of infection tend to show a major decline in mental state as well, responding in a repetitive fashion, dull and mechanical in action. As per the Foundation, it seems as if they're becoming robotic, which is literally what's happening. Information on a fully converted brain has been expunged by the Foundation, so it's unclear what will happen, but if the pattern of organs turned into machinery rings true, well, I think we could figure out the rest. Those infected in the early stages have reported feeling a fluttering or moving under the skin, as well as hearing a ticking noise similar to that of a clock. This sound appears to be the most prominent when the infection is spreading through the subject's neck, shoulders, and head. As the infection progresses, subjects tend to feel a sharp tearing pain in areas that are described as being converted. Similar to that of being cut with a knife or tearing a muscle, this pain can persist for hours or days, varying from subject to subject. The infected areas can be made up of metal, usually brass, steel, and iron. However, in some cases, the infection appears to replace tissue with leather, rubber, glass, wood, and other basic materials, as per the Foundation. Another interesting aspect is that the organs and tissues directly affected by this infection appear to become more resilient and carry the same strength and density as the materials they appear to resemble. Any damaged areas also repair, however the time in which it takes them to repair is much slower compared to a normal human. As per the Foundation, any damaged areas can be instantly repaired by replacing the damaged parts with new parts made up of the same materials. The scariest part of this SCP, as previously mentioned, is that people could be infected for months or years without anyone knowing. The Foundation also believes the infection spreads the quickest in large offices, malls, or other areas with large concentrations of people. Now, this virus does sound somewhat like a current pandemic, although as far as I'm concerned, the virus we're dealing with doesn't turn your insides into metal. Still, that being said, what we're dealing with is highly contagious, can spread through close contact and bodily fluids, and may not show symptoms in those affected. I'm not saying that our current pandemic is necessarily an SCP. In fact, I'm not saying that at all. But something here is a little suspicious and I'm not sure how I feel about it. Either way, let's continue on. So now that you understand what this virus is capable of doing, what happens if it's real? Unfortunately, it seems the only outcome here is that eventually the human race is infected and we all turn into robots. Given the fact that this disease is incurable and has a 100% rate of infecting those exposed to it, there's no reason to think we aren't inevitably doomed. Here's a prime example. You're walking through the mall, and the person in front of you coughs or sneezes. You don't think much of it, maybe make a comment about how they should cover their mouth, and that's it. Boom. You and every other person within a certain vicinity of that cough is now infected by this virus. Unlike many other viruses, this one can survive years without finding a host body, meaning it can be airborne for years without anyone knowing and randomly infect a person or a group of people who then would inevitably spread the virus even more. As we know, the virus responsible for COVID can survive without a host for a prolonged period of time, but not years. The virus also doesn't have a 100% rate of infecting those exposed to it, so it hasn't and wouldn't spread the same way. Still, even with the precautions we've been taking worldwide with people social distancing, wearing masks, and washing their hands regularly, we've been dealing with this virus for more than half the year. Safe to say if SCP-217 was real, everyone would eventually be affected by it. Although it wouldn't necessarily kill those that are infected, we'd eventually become a race of mechanical people. It's unclear how the virus replaces the tissue and at what point the virus stops replacing your tissue with mechanics and gears. I previously mentioned data about the fully infected brain being expunged, and it seems this SCP is letting us decide whether or not the virus affects the brain or not. Ultimately, this would determine whether or not the virus completely turns humans into machines or not. The fact that those who are infected tend to become lethargic and get frustrated when facing new problems, as well as tend to act in a robotic fashion, well, it leads me to believe this virus transforms the average human into a fully mechanical being. In a sense, if this virus were real, it turned the human race into a race of robots. Which begs the question, would the human race eventually die off? How would we reproduce? Assuming the virus also replaces some, if not all, of our reproductive organs. If the virus were to in fact completely transform humans into robotic beings, and I mean completely, then yes, eventually the human race would die off because, well, we just wouldn't be able to reproduce. But that doesn't necessarily mean we, as people, would die. The only real way to kill someone infected by the virus, I assume, would be to stop repairing any issues and to discontinue any maintenance. I mean, just throw it in a body of water. But as per the Foundation's page, I quote, "Testing has shown that there are no ill effects if parts made from normal materials, steel, wood, leather, replace the existing biomechanical clockworks. This means if someone were to need a repair and got whatever their issue was fixed, technically, they would be able to continue functioning. So although the human race would eventually go extinct, those who were once human but infected with the clockwork virus would likely be eternal or would eventually just stop working due to old parts." And now we could talk about the real fun. Looking at how certain parts of the world have handled our current pandemic, with many people refusing to wear a mask, claiming it's their right not to, well, I gotta say, if SCP-217 was real, it wouldn't be long before the majority of the world would be infected. Now hopefully, upon finding the first infection, we realize how serious things were. But as we could see given our real life example here, things didn't seem to be all that serious until it was far too late. Once infections started spreading like wildfire, then we realized we had a problem on our hands. And even now, with all that we know, some people aren't taking things all that seriously. Whether they don't want to wear a mask, are willing to risk their safety and potentially others to go hang out with friends, or think that the whole thing isn't real in the first place, it makes it much harder to slow and stop the spread. So if we had another virus taking over, well, my money is that people would likely start to act the exact same way they are now, until it started to affect them personally. It's easy to assume if people saw firsthand that the virus turns you into a machine, or I guess a clock.
Pleased to meet you. I am TikTok.
They'd be scared. But it's also easy to assume many people wouldn't believe it's real in the first place. Not to bring it back to our current situation, but I mean, some people don't think it's real. Now look, I'm not here to get political, as personally, I really don't care in your beliefs so long as they don't harm me. Unfortunately, people doing things that will likely increase the spread of the virus does affect me, so I am standing here asking that you please wear a mask. If you don't, that's fine, but do it on an island somewhere so I don't have to get infected. And to wrap this one up, guys, if SCP-217 was real, well, I think it's quite obvious that life as we know it, yeah, it would change forever. You'd have the infected people who would just start to spread it to even more people, the people who didn't realize they were carriers, and those who don't think any of this is real in the first place. There wouldn't be any people who know it's real and are taking precautions not to get infected, because this thing would be around just way too long without people even knowing it existed in the first place. And by the time we realize what we're dealing with, and the thought of a potential vaccine even became a sliver of an idea, it would most definitely already be way too late. All in all, our fate would be sealed, and unless someone found a way to reverse the effects, we'd simply be a world of robot clock people within a few years' time. No pun intended there.
The SCP Foundation is one of the greatest brainchilds of the internet. A bunch of people sharing ideas over the internet to make a list of creatures, some deadly, some innocent, and others world-ending, all with the intention of entertaining everyone who comes to read them. Each SCP in the SCP Foundation is unique and have some interesting backstories. The SCP I'm bringing you here today is SCP-2598, otherwise known as the Moth Salesman. What if SCP-2598 was real? As is tradition over here at Life's Biggest Questions, we are going to start this with a little breakdown as to what this creature in question is before we talk about what if it was real. So what is SCP-2598? As I mentioned before, he is known as the Moth Salesman. He is a regular sized moth and has a small helmet. Other than the helmet, there's nothing strange about him. He is object class safe, so you don't need to worry about him trying to kill you and eat you. Really, the only thing he seems very eager to do is sell to you. At heart, this SCP is a salesman at all times. If you attempt to communicate with this bite-sized SCP, he will talk to you for as long as you want, potentially for hours if you let him, but no matter what you try to talk about with him, he will always take the conversation towards a sales pitch about his little helmet that he wears. His goal is to sell as many helmets as he can, and he will take every angle you can think of. If the helmet is too small for you, then maybe you can buy the helmet for a friend. If the helmet is too much money, well, that is fine, because you can pay for this useful tool with 3 small installments of $19.99. Would you like to know about the Moth's life and why he is able to talk to people? Well, he will tell you, and you better believe the story will lead into why you should buy this trusted helmet. Now, how is the Moth able to talk to people? Well, it is because the helmet he wears and the one he's so desperately trying to sell to every last person he talks to. He communicates through Morse code. He will tap his head and the helmet against your head or any person he is talking to, in the classic style of military communication known as Morse code. He understands all responses through the spoken word, but must respond in Morse code. Also, it seems he only wants to talk to the customer through head taps. People at the SCP Foundation have tried to supply SCP-2598 with communication pads that he could use to talk to someone, but he will never acknowledge them. This could be because the Moth Salesman has no idea how to use these communication pads, or it could be because he has no interest in using them. Now that you have an idea of what this SCP looks like and what his motivations are, what would it look like if this SCP was real? Well, if information of the SCP was ever leaked into the public, it would have one of two outcomes. If it was ever interviewed, it would immediately go viral. There would be memes and videos all over the world of this moth and that it could talk to people. Everyone would want to know how he is able to talk to people, and all people get in response is the continual sales pitch for the helmet that he is desperately trying to sell. This would most likely lead down the first option. People would be begin an endless investigation and interrogation to try and determine what this moth wants, and in the end they would find out he has nothing to offer except for the sales pitch. Although the moth would be sentient, he would most likely be ignored, shunned from society like all door-to-door salesmen. People wouldn't kill it because they are sentient beings, but people would do everything they could to slip away from this moth's sales pitch. We might see them get ignored to the point where there is so little helmets that are sold that the moth salesman eventually vanishes from society and they go extinct. Then the idea of the moth salesman would be lost to humanity. It would become a dream, a fad that blew up in a decade, affected our culture, and then once people got tired of it, it was gone forever. Or we could see the exact opposite happen. What if the little moth was able to get into the hearts and minds of people and started to make sales? Then we might see the moth helmets start as a small brand, maybe a little pop-up, but then it would grow. It would hit the mainstream as something you would have to have. The new trendy item. Kylie Jenner would have one of these moth helmets as a pendant on her necklace, and then the next thing you know, everyone would be trying to get one. And as for the moth's company, it would evolve. Maybe his ability to sell would even evolve. Then he would grow his business and make it into an empire, moving away from only selling helmets and get into the game of selling all sorts of clothing. Now Moth brand would become a household name. Everyone and their dog would own something that comes from the massive corporation known as MothCorp. And to run this massive empire, there would be a mixture of humans and moths. Moths who have been taught the ability to communicate with humans the same way that SCP-2598 has been doing for all this time. This would change how our society works. We would have moths living and working in the same places as people. With this many moths and the ability to learn and communicate, some of them would have to venture into other passions. A moth who only wants to sell would be an old stereotype and would almost become prejudice. Moths would have to move into the government. They would need their own representation. People hanging out with moths all day would create relationships, and people would become friends with moths, maybe even lovers. The moth-human connection would grow deep. We would see the first moth on the moon, and future civilizations would be built around moths and humans living together. Of course, we would never be able to inbreed, but the moths would always be close in our hearts. I think it's safe to say if SCP-2598 was real, the world would be a very strange place. Not more dangerous, but definitely more weird. I think we have cracked the case of what it might look like if SCP-2598 was real. Welcome back to Life's Biggest Questions. Most of you are probably familiar with the SCP Foundation, but if this is new to you, it's a collective thought project on the internet introducing new SCPs constantly from different people. Sort of like a creepy pasta but more organized. There are thousands of these guys and each is unique from the last. Today we are going to be looking at one of the strangest SCPs I have ever read about. I'm your host Chadarena, and on today's Life's Biggest Questions we are going to be diving into what the world would look like if SCP-2682 was real. I would like to start with a breakdown of this SCP. There is a lot to cover, so I really think you at home need a briefing to understand what exactly this SCP is. SCP-2682 is an object class contained and was first discovered in Kiev, Russia. It appeared in the back of a hardware store on a piece of fly paper. No one noticed it at first. From just looking at it, you would not be able to know anything about it, because it only looks like a Korean raspberry, a very harmless looking fruit. It wasn't until some of the employees started to hear what sounded like television static, but they couldn't figure out where the static was coming from. They could only hear it at all times when they were in the hardware store. None of the customers could hear the static, so some of the employees went to the hospital to see if anything was wrong with them, and once the reports reached the SCP Foundation, they went to investigate and made their discovery. They quickly put the area on lockdown, sent out disinformation agents to tell the world that the place was poisoned by a poisoned well, and it needed to be contained with no entry. They built a 70-meter by 5-meter containment cell around the SCP and then considered the hardware store abandoned and condemned. They have constant security there, as well as security cameras to make sure that no one ever enters the building. First tests with the SCP attempted to touch it. The first person was ripped into spaghetti-like strings and then sucked into the SCP. The second person tried to touch it with a copper rod. Him and the rod vanished, and a croissant was left in their place. Another experiment was performed with a squirrel, putting it into the same containment area as SCP-2682, and the squirrel attempted to free the SCP from the flypaper. At this point, the experiment was concluded. After prolonged exposure to this SCP, it was discovered that the SCP could talk through telepathy with a 35-meter radius. Once this was established, an interview was conducted with SCP-2682. It was discovered that the SCP can only understand what it calls mental electricity given off by sentient beings. It cannot see or understand understand anything less than that. It could also not tell the difference between the squirrel and the humans. When asked where it came from, it said it comes from limbo mesh in between worlds, and that it was a being of all-knowing that discovered God, gained all of its information, and now only exists to move through dimensions and gain more information. This was the most interesting excerpt from the interview. When asked where it began, it stated this. Okay, at a certain point in our history, the philosophers were searching desperately for new knowledge. The problem was that we had gotten so far already. With all the knowledge gathered, there was nothing left to know. No questions to ask save for sensitive things. Even the study of wisdom had reached an end. We were all upset. See? We began to experiment with the occult. We did silly things because there was nothing else to do. But it turns out there were things we never gave a chance to be real. God was hiding from us. We found him. He was afraid. We ran experiments on it and extracted its knowledge. We used this knowledge to play with the rules of the universe and create new universes with the new rules within our own. But then there was really nothing left to know. With nothing left to do, our only choice was to leave, harvest knowledge from the alternate dimensions. We collaborate for a super long time. By the end of the interview, it was clear that the SCP was stuck both literally and figuratively on the flypaper, unable to leave our dimension, and with no understanding of our dimension without the knowledge that was given to it, it desperately wanted to leave and continue gathering knowledge. SCP-268 says that it is the fruit of everything in its dimension. Now that you have a better understanding of what this SCP is, let's get a look into what the world would look like if it was real. Well, firstly, this would mean that there would be other dimensions, God, and the ability to take everything from God and become God yourself. There would also be the power through the occult to change the fabric of space and time and become something far greater than anything any of us could ever understand. That is a lot to take in. If this SCP came to Earth, it would most likely be stuck in a similar way, and possibly would fall into the hands of a regular person. We might see an instant connection happen between these two. The human would understand that they possess the most powerful thing possibly in all dimensions, and SCP-268 would desperately be wishing to get out of our dimension so it can continue to gain all the knowledge through the dimensions. But the only way the SCP could do this would be to teach the person the ways of the occult to gain the great power so it could take the SCP out of the Korean raspberry form. This would start as a small allegiance, but then maybe grow into a cult. As said person needed help, they would recruit more people, show them the power of SCP-268. We would have an underground legion of magic users who would be quickly gaining the ability to bend space-time to their will. If they were careful enough, they would be able to gain this power without ever being detected, but if they were, people would try to stop them. Once anyone got word that there were people who could control reality and they were led by a telepathic raspberry, there would be a firestorm. We might see a war against this legion and the rest of the planet. Maybe we would win, destroying this all-knowing berry, and everything would move on as business as usual. But the more likely answer is that the berry would show its true power, wipe out any competition, and all of humanity would devote everything to worshipping and learning from this berry. We would all become omnipotent beings, who would go on our own quest for knowledge throughout the universe, and potentially together we would devour all the knowledge from every other dimension, becoming gods beyond gods and devouring each other. Then there would be nothing, a reverse Big Bang. All the dimensions would collapse into themselves and there would be endless nothingness, from endless chaos to the black pit of endless empty. Well, that got intense, but that's what happens when you bring a super-powered fruit into the mix. This one might get a little out of control. For now, we're gonna have to stick to the fruit that doesn't know everything across dimensions and beyond. But if we ever do find it, I'll see you at the end of the universe.
This is a tale that predates the Foundation and possibly even humans. The story of a humanoid ape thing roaming the woods, a potential missing link in the evolution of man. Who is this hairy creature? Why haven't we seen more of it? How do we know how big its feet are? Nobody really knows. What we do know though is that folks love cryptids. They love talking about these creatures that seemingly shouldn't exist. Because no solid evidence of their existence has been found, a lot of people are happy leaving it as a mystery. Folks will make up stories and think of reasons that these beasts are sneaking around about the periphery. But what if the story behind one of the most famous anomalous beings was a little more fleshed out? What if it was more dangerous than we can imagine? I'm your horror host, Keegan Hughes, and today we're asking a big, beefy question. What if SCP-1000 was real? I'll start off by confirming what I was hinting at before. SCP-1000 is Bigfoot. The Bigfoot. So go ahead, read the declassified information in the entry. This nocturnal omnivorous ape evolved alongside humans, living contemporaneously with early humans in large numbers until 10 to 15,000 years ago. The reason we don't see more big feet today is because of an extinction event that eliminated more than 95% of their population. It's unclear as to what exactly this was, but it was thought to be some sort of anomalous pseudo-disease. This unexplainable illness seems to be passed on at a genetic level and affects even the present-day iterations of Bigfoot. After living in secret for thousands of years, most large shoes are born immune, and those who are not will die relatively quickly. It's survival of the fittest in fast motion. Now this disease isn't only dangerous to the cryptids in the woods, no. Any hominid that observes an instance of 1000 has a minimum 2% chance of being killed instantly through anomalous means via permanent cessation of brain function. To put it simply, if a person sees a Bigfoot, they might just die on the spot. The larger you look at huge toe, the higher your chance of instant death becomes. Plus, as I said before, the minimum percent chance is 2. Some people have a much higher predisposition to perishing. If instant death stare wasn't bad enough on its own, there's a non-zero possibility that this disease could transfer to human carriers. So if an instance of SCP-1000 found its way to a major population center, a whole lot could go wrong. People would drop like flies and likely spread the infection further. An end-of-world scenario doesn't seem too far off. Thankfully, the tall hairy lads seem to instinctively avoid human contact, so we're safe-ish for now. We've got the declassified story, so let's put it to the test. What would happen if SCP-1000 was real? If Bigfoot was really roaming the woods, ready to inadvertently kill us in the blink of an eye? Well, we'd have a lot less hikers, that's for sure. Any forest-based activity would immediately become more dangerous. Recreational forestry would probably dwindle very quickly, and all the hikers and mountain bikers would have to find new hobbies. Cottage owners would be much more wary about their waterfront properties, and rural communities would have a lot more trouble attracting any new folks. Careers like logging and tree planting would become much higher risk, but probably wouldn't slow down much. Instead, they would be seen as noble and self-sacrificing jobs, and the pay rate would go up. This would cause prices to go up as well, and things like lumber and other forest-based goods would become more expensive. This in turn would ramp up the cost of all sorts of things we almost take for granted. Building supplies, paper, even wood byproducts used in stuff like medicine, plastics, and more. These increases, especially those involved in architecture, would price a lot of people out of home ownership and potentially even home rentals. Average places would become smaller, and rooming would start to look more like the days of old, where you rented one room in a building, no living space, no luxuries. All of this because of a deadly Bigfoot in the woods. I'm sure you're all just thrilled with my analysis of a mythical beast's effects on the lumber industry and its ripple effects, so let's move on to some more dramatic outcomes. If 1000 were indeed real, we'd definitely see some fanatics run off into the woods to find one. This would result in the untimely deaths of many lunatics and cryptid chasers. Rest in peace, Looney Joe. However, some would survive and potentially take the pseudo-disease home with them. This is extremely bad news for everyone. Someone with the disease wouldn't exhibit any symptoms and wouldn't look any different than regular humans. Therefore, they could roam around as any average person has the freedom to do, spreading pestilence and insta-death to all sorts of innocent folk. And as is predicted in the containment procedures, people would start dropping like flies. Nobody would know why either, so a reaction to the spread would be delayed. Within a very short period of time, the whole world would be at the grip of Bigfoot fever, and humans might not be around for too much longer after that. Ouch. And that would be that, if I were telling you the whole story. In classic Foundation fashion, there's another layer to this tale of big feet and small lifespans. If you've got the proper clearance, you can access the whole story behind SCP-1000. This involves the realization that the death stare is only a cover story, which makes sense because how would that even work? There is no pseudo-disease, there is no rapidly increasing percent chance of instant death, but there is a humanoid species out there. And it did grow alongside humans until a certain point. In fact, the hairy humanoids outgrew humans for a very long time. At one point, they had the technology to rival and surpass much of the silicon-based stuff we use today. Most of it was nature-based too, and it's not yet understood how a lot of it worked. While us humans scrounged around in our hunter-gatherer phase, the big feet came up with organic technology, turning trees and birds into fast-moving ships, herds of animals into trains, bushes into flying vehicles. This tech was so impressive and oppressive, humans almost went extinct. For reasons still unclear, a strange power change occurred, and humans were able to initiate an SK-class dominance shift almost overnight. In one day, 70% of SCP-1000's population was wiped out. After all was said and done, no traces were left, not even memories of all this happening. Through careful use of technology, a few select humans retained their knowledge of these events, just in case. After the wipeout, humans returned to their hunter-gatherer ways and evolved to their present-day iteration. All the while, remaining big feet watched on from the shadows, unable to reclaim their technological dominance. So, the big feet we see today are just like us, but hairier, with the latent knowledge that we took everything from them. Have they remembered? Are they plotting revenge? No wonder the Foundation is keeping this a secret. So what would we do if this were the case? What if SCP-1000 was real, and also a race of overthrown humanoids, biding their time, waiting for a chance to live in the sun once again? Well, there's not much we could do. We'd live in blissful ignorance until the Bigfoot uprising. With their organic tech, they would pour out from the shadows and rain death upon the humans that so brutally took power away from them so many years ago. We had our chance to extend the olive branch, and now it's time for war. The Great Bigfoot War. However, it might be good for humanity to have a common enemy like that. No more infighting with our own species, it's time to take on the existential mirror threat of hairy humanoids hunting for hereditary heretics. So the human race would band together, forget party ties, and fight against the encroaching environmental forces. It would be a grueling battle for sure, flesh versus steel, plants versus plastic, and in the end it's hard to call a winner. If the humans win, we could celebrate the coming together of our people and the elimination of an ancient threat reawakened. If the big feet win, it would probably be better for every other organism on Earth, considering how we've treated the planet till this point. Either way, a lot is gonna change. Who do you think would win the war, humans or big feet? Would there be a way to find peace between people and SCP?